On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what's in today's show, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode we have one of our old friends back. It's Ronan Coghlan, and he is going to be talking about cryptids, or things that appear to be cryptids that are only ever reported once. He also makes an amusing quip about Sorella Breverman, which for legal reasons I've taken out.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to, goodness me, something weird's happening over there. It appears that Archie and Hennis built a functioning time machine, and we've gone back 4 decades, back to the 70s.
It was better in the 70s, wasn't it? It was better in the 70s. Yes, Ken, it was better in the 70s, much better. The pop was better in the 70s, wasn't it? Yes, they did have better pop. Yeah, they had Corona pop in glass bottles, and when you finish with it, you could take it back to the shop and get a rebate on the bottle. It was better in the 70s.
It certainly was, Ken. I agree with you entirely. Let's start again. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is the largest, and we believe the best, mystery animal research group in the English-speaking world. And welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you who don't know, On the Track is a bi-weekly, because we come out on Wednesday evenings at about 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and Saturday afternoons at 3, like we are now, for about half an hour. And it is a miscellany, a mélange, a mixture, what else are we going to do then, Rich?
Megalotherium?
But Megalotherium is a giant sloth.
Yeah, but it begins with them.
Okay. Of hard science, weird shit, and surreality.
What's surreality, Uncle Richard?
Anton was a porcelain faun whose speech was made of brass. He resembled Tamworth's town centre, and his peonies were quite crass.
What was all that about? I have absolutely no idea. I think we should move swiftly on and introduce today's guest, who is always one of our most popular guests on this show, all the way from the land of the bogs and the little people. It's Ronan Coghlan. So, what are we going to talk about today, Ronan?
Isolates. Now, there are many cryptids in which people say it's been seen here, there, and ever. Oh, there's a cat on the move on your side of things, showing great interest in what's going on.
Civet, who looks more and more like Bubastis every day.
Many people see cryptids that are seen again and again, or at least reported again and again. But there are an awful lot of cryptids that are seen once and once only. And what are we to make of them? Now, I have a list of various things we are to make of them. First of all, does the word wog mean anything to you? To some people,
Yes.
To some people, it is a term of opprobrium applied to Orientals. But to Australians, it means a bacterium. I'm not talking about either of those. In fact, it is also the name of a little-known cryptid that has only been reported once. This creature was seen around the year 1800 in a place called Jug Tavern in Georgia. Now, if you look for Jug Tavern on a map today...
Is this Georgia in the United States or Georgia in Eastern Europe?
It's Georgia, USA. Well, now, if you look for Jug Tavern in Georgia, I suppose it didn't survive the prohibition with a name like that. It's changed its name to Winder, but it seems to be still there. Now, this creature was described as having a head like a bear, nearly the size of a horse, black hair, hind legs shorter than forelegs, mouth never seemingly able to close over its huge white teeth, and a long tail of uniform size, uniform width, and a tuft of hair at the end of this. Now, this was reported in 1800, and nobody has ever seen this creature since. The wog has existed in isolation. Do we give any credit to a report of such a creature? I'll give you another isolate just as an example. This is the rabbit-like creature. Not a rabbit, but a rabbit-like creature, which was seen in Roseburg, Oregon in 1999 or thereabouts. The size of a dog, cat-like head, elongated neck, tangled hair, which had spots on it. Now, neither of these things seems terribly credible. Neither of these things, though, seems absolutely incredible. What conclusion do we come to when we get a report of one of these things? Well, there's a bevy of conclusions. The first, and I think possibly the most likely, is misperception. Somebody has seen something and has put two and two together and made it into five, but he has been mistaken. The second possibility is it's a hoax. Those creatures looked as though they might be a hoax. Then it could be an animal that is perfectly valid but is partially hidden and somehow gives the visual impression of one of these kind of creatures. It could be an isolated member of an undiscovered population. Now, a number of times, undiscovered populations of a species have occurred. In fact, if you look at the CFZ USA blog, very often new animal discovered in Paraguay, for example, and it turns out there's a whole species of them that the Paraguayans were quite unaware of. So it can be a species that is unknown. But the most controversial one, and the one I think still has a certain amount of scientific validity behind it, is the extra-dimensional one. Now, before we get off into Star Trek or something, what exactly is an extra dimension? Because although they're mentioned frequently in cryptozoology books, they're not terribly carefully explained in them. It came from another dimension, but where this other dimension is or what it could be is never really made clear. The types of other dimension I would isolate as follows. Another dimension can be something on the earth, but imperceptible to the usual inhabitants of the earth. It can also mean another earth, which is parallel with this one. This would be the kind of case in which people tend to go into caves in stories and come out in a completely different place. Then there is the one that is not on Earth at all. Suddenly you step through a porthole and you're in Narnia or wherever. Now, in the days of yore, when you and I were young, Maggie, there was a tendency, when these sort of explanations were proffered, to burst into hoots of laughter at the very idea. But the idea of parallel universes is now taken seriously scientifically. Qualified scientists with an alphabet of qualifications after their name are quick to say these days, it might be there. How you would get to that, or how a cryptid from that would come into your dimension, can only be explained by the existence of portholes. If you remember, John Keel said there were certain places that were specifically open to strange creatures coming through them. And I think that when you see an isolated creature, there is every chance it is something that has strolled through one of these portholes, and having seen our delightful Earth with all its smog and corruption, they have stolen back through the portholes and are not seen again. Particularly when responsible and reliable people report these things, I think the alternative universe must be considered as a possibility. Now, I know a lot of people who haven't followed up the science of this, or who have heard it but vaguely, will find this a rather shocking idea, but I think it provides a reasonable explanation for apparently valid cryptids that are seen only once and never again. But there can also be hidden populations that we don't know about. And I would draw your attention to the third species of orangutan discovered in Sumatra. There used to be only the two species, the Sumatran and the Borneo one. But then, not long ago, a third species was discovered, population about 500, and it had eluded the wide-eyed Sumatrans for many a century. Now, if a population of that size can exist, and do remember orangutans are not tiny creatures, if a population of that size can exist, well, populations of other animals, particularly ones that are not quite so large as that, can certainly exist. And when you get down to things like fish and insects, all sorts of things can exist. There is one other idea I have about things that are seen only once, and that occasionally an image from the past has become imprinted in the air. Now, I use the term in the air vaguely. I mean imprinted in reality so that it can be observed. And I'll give you an example. Two policewomen in Britain were driving a police car. Nothing surprising in that. Then suddenly out of a bush burst a stag. Huge stag in full red deer, not any of the introduced ones like the sika. And after it came a very hairy humanoid waving a large club. So the policewomen looked at each other and they said, "Shall we report this?" And they took out their notebooks and then they said, "No, nobody will believe us and we'll be the joke of the police station for some considerable time." But I think what they might have seen was a snatch of prehistory still preserved somehow in the atmosphere. Now, those are the only explanations I can come up with so far about isolates. Isolates are either misperceived or hoaxed, or they're singular members of a species that does exist, but exists in low numbers, or we get into the cosmic thing. They're coming in from other dimensions or other realities, and have the good sense not to stay too long in the smog-filled earth. Those, anyway, are my conclusions about isolated cryptids. I selected two to mention today just to show how weird an isolated cryptid can be, but although they sounded weird, they're not impossible cryptids that I cited. Those kind of anatomies are possible ones. It's not like a dragon with three heads, one of them on the end of its tail or something. So I think there is a good argument to be made out for some isolated cryptids being ultra-dimensional, or as the UFO people put it, ultra-terrestrial. What do you think yourself?
I've got, if we can backpedal a bit, I've got something that you may not know. Back to you talking about the usage of the word wog.
Yes.
As you probably will remember, one of my favorite authors is he's dead, Robert Heinlein.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
One of his more recent books, which was written in, I believe, 1980, was a book called The Number of the Beast, which includes all sorts of crafty references to 19th century and early 20th century science fiction writers, and all sorts of little things were quotes or plays on words or general references.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in one section, which these days they would probably call steampunk, but it wasn't known as that in those days. I don't think it was known as anything in those days. But in one section, the main protagonists of the novel are on Mars, which is being run by a 19th century type colonial administration of the British.
Yes.
And they refer to the native Martians, who are funny little misshapen ape-like creatures. They refer to them as wogs. And I'm wondering, because there are so many other little literary references that I keep on picking up in that book, I wonder if it was somewhere one of the 19th century or early 20th century science fiction writers referred to the simian inhabitants of the Red Planet as wogs. I just give that to you for whatever it's worth, and it's probably worth nothing, but it's something which is mildly intriguing.
Well, in my extensive library, I have a large book which would cost about £200 on the open market these days, called SF, The Early Years. Mm-hmm. And it gives a huge bibliography of each SF book written before 1930, shall we say. And it also unfolds the entire plot of each book. So if there's a thing with wogs in it, I will certainly try to look it out there. I think the term wog was quite widely used in the early, what century are we in now? In the early 20th century. And he could have picked it up from anywhere, but he could have picked it up from a science fiction book as well. The only trouble is there are about 10,000 science fiction books with their plots in this volume, but it's a very handy thing, and I may well track down a warg in that. There's one other thing about isolates that I haven't touched on, but is perhaps worth bearing in mind. How many isolated, peculiar creatures that seem anomalous are escapees from laboratories where experiments have been going on, and the escapees have managed to escape. And there could be things wandering around the country that have got out of laboratories. There used to be a research station, I think it was called Turtle Island, and it was suspected that the odd, strange, anomalous creature, the subject of genetic research, had got out of that. That would, of course, explain why you got a creature whose like could not be seen anywhere. The only thing is, I don't think those creatures would live very long, so you wouldn't tend to see them too often. But sometimes in cryptozoology, you get pieces of bizarrerie, and they could very well be the experiments of scientists who assure us they're doing it for the good of science, whereas probably they should be making food to feed those who don't have enough. And I have another little project in mind. Are you familiar with the distinguished politician Suella Braverman, or Braverman?
Yes.
Yes. Was originally called after Suellen, a character in the soap Dallas. But when she went to school, they wouldn't really tolerate Suellen. Suellen was a character of a plurality of bedfellows, and they didn't think Suellen a suitable name for a little girl, so they changed it to Suella. That's where she got her name. An interesting little factoid to throw into the mixture.
The world is getting ever more peculiar. I think it was always peculiar, but it seems to be even weirder now.
Well, the thing is, you can find a lot of peculiar things, but you have to dig, because the really peculiar things tend to end up in a small paragraph in the corner of a newspaper. There's a site on the internet now, Weird News, which tells you odd things about famous people in history, like, oh, I don't know, Stalin dribbled or something. And it's really quite fascinating to look it up at times. And indeed, I have linked to some of its stories with the blog, the American blog. Now, at this stage, I am going to have to cut us short a bit because I have to get to the doctor. He pointed out to me that I now had 75 candles on my birthday cake. Therefore, I needed all my medication. Take as much as you like, he said. Don't worry about addiction, he said. I could only conclude that he thought the end of the Coghlan lifespan was looming into sight. I had a brain scan the other day. There's nothing wrong with my brain. So at least I'm still thinking clearly. The rest of me has gone rather to pot.
Yes, most of me has gone to pot. But my brain still works most of the time.
Well, so long as you are, then you am. That is a terrible.
Sorry.
That's a terrible twist of Descartes. But cogito ergo sum.
But it's putting Descartes before the horse.
Oh, now come on. That is a murderous pun. And it was also murderous the first time I told it to you some years ago. I remember telling you that one.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And there's the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little house, will tell you. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you won't be told when the next episode's gonna be.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
If you've been affected by any of the topics in today's episode, you can just bugger off, because we don't give a monkeys. Bloody well get a grip. Sort your own bloody problems out rather than ringing up somewhere.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before we go, I want to say a big thank you to everybody who helped with this episode and without whom there wouldn't have been an episode. I want to say thank you to Richard Freeman, to my producer Louis, to Wally the Comedy Rhinoceros, and to my special guest this week, who's been the irrepressible Ronan Coghlan. I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What am I going to be back with? Well, it's actually probably going to be with Richard, and it's going to be a book review. And then next Saturday I'm back, and I know what I've got coming because I've already filmed it, but I'm going to make you wait. Well, okay. It's our pre-Christmas episode and it features Ian Squid. So, Mr. McCrinnan, I hope you're watching this show, Mr. McCrinnan, and you're going to be watching next Saturday's show, Mr. McCrinnan. Because if you are, I'm going to be here doing the live chat and the notifications and all the other stuff I do. And if you're watching, I'll be seeing you.